from New York, I'm Chris Hayes. Thank you for joining us tonight. It is a hilarious truth about Washington that I come before you tonight to lead off my cable newscast with the following news. The Senate successfully voted to begin debating a piece of legislation today. That is news. That is huge news because thanks to the vigorous new tradition of the near constant Republican filibuster, voting to start debate is something the Senate almost never does anymore. Here, your illustrious United States senators are overcoming a filibuster to begin debate on a gun safety package today. Again, just to appreciate how crazy the filibuster is right now in practice, this was not a filibuster of the bill. This was a filibuster of debating the bill, which is completely routine. This happens all the time. The remarkable thing today about today's filibuster of debating a bill was that the filibuster failed. On the strength of support of most of the Democrats and 16 Republicans, only 2 Democrats joined by 29 Republicans in trying and failing to block the debate, Arkansas's Mark Pryor and Alaska's Mark Begich. And the reason this remarkable turn of events was allowed to take place in the Senate today was because of the big news we brought you yesterday, which is that a deal was worked out between Democrat Joe Manchin and Republican Pat Toomey on expanding background checks. Now, Joe Manchin, who is a, let's say, gun-positive Democrat from West Virginia with an A rating from the NRA, has been looking to make a deal like this for months, ever since the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School in December. And from the very beginning, he made it incredibly clear he wanted to work on gun safety, not just with Republicans from across the aisle, but with the NRA itself, in the room at the negotiating table. And he was pretty optimistic the NRA would cooperate.
I want to call all our friends in NRA and sit down and have this, bring them into it. They have to be at the table. We all have to. I'm telling you, I believe this is a time for all of us to sit down and move in a responsible manner. And I think they will.
That was Joe Manchin speaking on this network on December 17th, just 3 days after the Sandy Hook massacre. And here's what happened next. Publicly, even as Joe Manchin was inviting them into the fold, the NRA was fighting background checks with all their might. In multiple public appearances, Wayne LaPierre specifically called out the idea of universal background checks as an unworkable nightmare bureaucracy being offered up by political elites. But Joe Manchin really wanted to bring the NRA to the table to work out a deal on background checks, and he did. Late last month, Politico was reporting on the progress of the negotiations, citing several sources as saying that the fact that the NRA was even talking with Manchin suggested at least some room for negotiation for the group. For their part, the NRA would not talk about their negotiations with Manchin, but a spokesman told Politico at the time the organization was strongly opposed to what they've referred to as criminalizing transfers between 2 law-abiding people, calling it a non-starter. And then yesterday, a deal was struck. It quite notably did not include an expansion of background checks for private person-to-person sales. As he rolled out the deal, Joe Manchin again emphasized the degree to which he'd been working with the NRA, telling reporters he'd been in constant dialogue with the organization. NBC News reported the NRA was a, quote, near constant presence during the talks. And amazingly, as the deal was coming together, it was looking like the NRA was maybe not going to fight it, which almost made sense given they'd apparently been in the room negotiating it. So the rollout of the deal was accompanied by all this fevered speculation the NRA might decide not to count a vote for this compromise against members of Congress in their scorecard system they use to grade lawmakers. Just before the big press conference, a spokesperson for Senator Manchin told BuzzFeed the NRA remained neutral on the bill. And the NRA came out with a statement that did not entirely contradict that sentiment. It was critical of the deal overall, but praised parts of it, namely the part where it leaves at least one major background check loophole in place. But they were, in fact, stopping short of saying they would count yes votes for the bill against the senators who cast them, which actually sounded like really good news for the future of the bill. But it also sounded to me at least way, way too good to be true. I was sitting in my office yesterday reading these reports thinking, really, the the NRA is really not going to score the first major piece of gun legislation to come before the Senate since 1994? No, of course not. Of course not really. The NRA soon clarified with a letter to senators informing them that, yes, they are unequivocally opposed to the compromise deal, the one they were in the room helping to negotiate, which means that, yes, the background check bill gets a debate, but there will be another filibuster before it gets an up or down vote, and the NRA will damn sure be scoring that filibuster vote as well as the final vote in the bill itself, assuming it even gets that far. And that means the NRA is really good at what they do. It means that after working successfully, it would appear with the senators who are proposing it to weaken the background check proposal before it ever hit the Senate floor, leaving an impression they'd remain neutral on the bill once it was introduced. They then turn around and attempt to shoot it to pieces. So if the bill passes, they've succeeded in watering it down. If it doesn't, they've killed it. That is how the NRA rolls. Joining us tonight from Washington, Jack Abramoff, former Republican lobbyist. At the table, David Sirota, columnist for Salon.com, and Leah Gunn Barrett, executive director of New Yorkers Against Gun Violence. All right, Jack, as someone with some experience and practice in this art, is there like a playbook for lobbyists of this move where you go into the negotiations at the table, you leave the impression that you're going to be on board with the final outcome, you get it watered down based on that impression, then come out and turn around and try to kill it?
Well, I'm not going to say that's not part of the lobbyist playbook. And it indeed is part of the lobbyist playbook. And I think depending on the issue, you'll find lobbyists really doing almost anything to thwart things. I have to tell you, Chris, based on the calls I had just up until the moment I walked into the studio, the folks in the NRA are not saying that they were at any point either involved in serious negotiations or favor of the bill. But put that aside for now. I think your question about do lobbyists do this, this is exactly what lobbyists do. Lobbyists' job are to stop bills.
Right.
And playing defense is much easier than offense, and this is a defense. And whether it's the NRA or whoever it is, this is a typical lobbyist move.
No, explain that. When you say playing defense is easier than offense, what does that mean legislatively?
It is much easier to stop legislation in the Congress than to get legislation through. Right. Getting legislation through, you're going to have 1 or 2 or 3 ways to do it. Stopping legislation, you're going to have 50 ways to do it. And mainly it's throwing bombs and blowing up train tracks. And I think that lobbyists know that, and it's easier for them to stop things.
But here's what's interesting to me about this, David, and you worked on the Hill. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you'll see, like, for instance, when they were talking about, Politico was reporting this, a few other places reported, that on the gun safety side, right, the White House had kind of cut a deal with the gun safety activists, which was to bring them inside the tent. You're going to be part of our discussions on this legislation, but the price of that is when it comes out, you don't criticize it, right? And that seems like something, I can understand that thinking because you're getting something out of it. But if you're sort of negotiating with someone with no buy-in from them, then you're just setting yourself up for this kind of deal.
Unless you think, I think what's going on is that the NRA actually won. That the NRA watered down this bill. They got the assault weapons ban out, they got the magazine stuff out, and now we're left with a background check that's not even really a universal background check. And the NRA...
No, it is expanded.
It's certainly expanded. It's better than what we have. It's certainly expanded, but it's not 100%. And the NRA said, you know what? Let's cut our losses. We're gonna win. We got everything that not everything, but we got a lot of things that we don't want off the table. But we can't go to our membership, right? The other constituency of the NRA is their membership. They can't go to their membership and say this is okay. So they come out with a bill that they can accept, and they can also go to their membership and say we're against this, so that the leadership of the NRA essentially wins both ways.
On the contrary, it's not their membership they're concerned about. I mean, NRA members support universal background checks, you know, 80% or higher. What they're really worried about are the gun manufacturers who are largely funding them. If you want to call them their membership, then the gun manufacturers are their membership. And the
or
reason,
their constituency.
Well, the reason they're afraid of universal background checks is because it means they're going to lose gun sales. If you cut off this avenue, 40% of gun sales, which currently have no background checks whatsoever, and you're going to cut that down to maybe 30%.
So wait, do you think though, to go to David's characterization, he just called it a win? I mean, we got on air yesterday, and I thought, given where this debate was 6 months ago, before Sandy Hook happened, and then even in the wake of Sandy Hook when people said, well, they're going to try and let's see if they get anything, yesterday's deal to me felt like a victory in terms of where the center had moved. There's also another way of looking at it, which is that it's so watered down that the lobbying industrial complex has been victorious.
I don't want to say it's not a victory.
Yeah, but
it's not as huge a victory as it seems.
What's your thought on that?
Well, I mean, I think if the bill is, first of all, when it gets to the floor, they're going to try attacking and putting all sorts of amendments.
Amendments, right.
Concealed carry reciprocity, which, we certainly do not want. We fought that off a couple of years ago.
Concealed carry reciprocity is the idea that if you are from a state that has concealed carry, you can
bring it to a strong gun law state like New York, and you can carry your gun around Times Square, and this we clearly do not.
And there's been some notion that that's part of what is going to.
Oh, we know they're going to do it. I mean, it's pretty predictable. And if they do that, then the whole thing is going to die. But you know what? This is a long-term fight, and the NRA is marginalizing itself by being so out of touch with the broad majority of American people.
But are they? Do you think that's true, Jack?
No, I actually don't think that's true, because you have to remember what the NRA's goal is here. The NRA's goal, first of all, they're extremely powerful, and they're not the only powerful gun operation. Well, I think what I mean by powerful, they may not have 90% of the people out there supporting them. They may not even have 50% of the people supporting. But you have to understand from a lobbying point of view, what they need to do is activate their activists and get the people who are responding to them to be in the fight. And I think they're doing that very effectively. And frankly, I haven't seen them do anything that's going to cause them a problem with the people who support them, who make up their coalition in the future.
If that is, I mean, if that's the test, that makes sense of the Wayne LaPierre speech. I mean, that's right. If the audience are the base, are the activists that, and let's remember, I mean, one of the things I think, well, hold that thought. The thing that you just said about amendments, I think, is important. Jack, that's what's going to happen next. And this is another place where the lobbying industrial complex does its work, right? Because another great way of killing a bill, you've gotten over the filibuster. This thing's going to go to the floor. If you want to kill this thing, amendments are going to get another bite at the apple.
Right, there's no question about it. It's another tool in the playbook. Get as many amendments, fill up the tree, as they say, the amendment tree of a bill. Try to get things put onto the bill if they can, although I'm not certain they're going to be able to get concealed carry reciprocity or things like that. But by the way, the other side plays that too. The first two amendments are undoubtedly the Feinstein Amendment on assault weapons, which is political cover, and then the magazine amendment, which is, again, political cover. So both sides sort of play that.
Explain, what do you mean by political cover?
Political cover in the sense that Democrats who are in states such as Montana, such as in the Southwest and out in the West, Democrats are in more conservative gun states, let's call them.
Okay.
They need to be able to show that they are not anti-gun. So there are going to be some amendments that come up that they're going to be able to vote against, giving themselves cover, and then they'll be able to vote in final passage.
And where the NRA does have its power, and I agree with you that the NRA doesn't have necessarily power of numbers of voters, but where it does have power is in those gerrymandered House districts, those gerrymandered Republican districts where Republican members of Congress are more afraid of a pro-NRA primary than having to move to the center in a general election.
But you know, this just gets to the point where we're New Yorkers against gun violence, and New York was the first state to pass strong gun safety legislation post-Sandy Hook, and we were followed quickly by Colorado and now Connecticut and other states, Maryland. And so the real progress is going to happen at the state level. You know, the federal government, the Congress will be the last to drag their feet, you know, kicking and screaming, and they will eventually. I think we eventually will get something, but maybe not this time around. And the NRA, in the meantime, is marginalizing itself. It really is, because it's going to be completely out of step with the American public. You're smiling, but no.
No, but my question is this is the profound question here. Does marginalizing itself matter, right? If the point is that you need you need the intensity as opposed to a broad opinion with you, which is what Jack is saying, right? You're saying you need the intensity of your activists. The question is, do they pay a price ultimately for alienating broad?
Well, we need to become intense too, and I think we will be. I mean, American and public opinion actually is increasing. In January, 56% of Americans were supporting stronger gun laws. In February, that jumped to 61%. So as opposed to, you know, the Newtown bump is actually increasing. It's not decreasing. Maybe it is with senators and Congress people, and maybe those people, because they're living a bit out of touch, they're in Washington. But the general American public is very, very concerned that something happened. They're fed up with this level of gun violence that we're tolerating. And I think, you know, I do believe a genuine grassroots movement is now sprouting, and it will be able to counter the NRA.
Jack, quickly, do you see this actually getting out of the Senate?
Yeah, I think there's a very strong possibility it could get out of the Senate. I know from the conversations I had about an hour ago, they're going to make a few other attempts at filibustering. They have a base of 31 votes. They think they could get those 8 other senators, and then they feel they're within striking distance. But I think that they're probably going to get it out of the Senate. What happens in the House, though, is an entire different ballgame.
And it's in the House, of course, where this same gerrymander.
That's right, and will it get watered down even more? I think one thing to say is I have a question about a Congress where the NRA is so powerful in the Congress that if any bill gets through, is that really unto itself an admission that what happened isn't necessarily what really needs to happen.
But I think from the perspective of, when you think about the perspective of the long-term trajectory of the issue, right? I mean, we're already dealing with the first bill on the Senate floor that deals with this issue since 1994, and that is, if you want to notch it in terms of wins and losses, that's a loss. Because if the NRA had its druthers, this would never see the light of day, right? The only gun bill we've gotten in the first term of Barack Obama was you can carry your gun in a national park. David Sirota of Salon.com, Leah Gunn Barrett of New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, and from Washington, Jack Abramoff giving us the playbook. Thank you very much. One thing you can say about the NRA's influence is at least that you have heard of the NRA. Another bill has come to life courtesy of a group you have no idea about. And if it becomes law, it would mean a pay cut for millions of hourly workers. That's next.